Okay, everyone, we're going to actually jump straight to our next distinguished speaker. So it's with my great pleasure that I get to introduce Richard Taylor, who is a member of the Institute of Politics Board of Fellows and co-chair of our Economic Development Policy Committee. Richard has over 25 years of business and professional experience. He serves as the CEO of Imbutech, a Pittsburgh-based electrical and general construction firm. Before his time as CEO, Richard worked on Capitol Hill as a government relations representative for a Fortune 500 energy company and was actively involved in congressional and presidential campaigns across the country. He's an active civic leader currently serving on the Macedonia Development Corporation and the Pittsburgh Foundation boards. Richard.
Hi, good afternoon. So I'm very aware that we have a few disadvantages here because you're going without the expected break. We're behind lunch and we've got dinner in front of us. But we're really fortunate to have a really great cleanup player for our discussion here today. One of the things that our first speaker talked about was the very innovative work that the state of Pennsylvania is doing in some critical areas that really open the door for economic opportunity. And so we're fortunate to have the quarterback for those innovative initiatives as our speaker. Rick Siger is the acting secretary of the State Department of Community and Economic Development, which, as you all know, is the real key player in our state for driving economic opportunity, finding innovation, and really bringing in and expanding business opportunities and employment in the Commonwealth. Rick is a very proud Pittsburgh native who comes from a family with a very rich legacy of very active civic engagement. But in his role as quarterback for the work of DCED and for the Shapiro administration, he really comes with an extensive background as a key skill position player in both the federal government and in state governments outside of Pennsylvania. And those of you who are active in politics knew during the Obama administration that if you wanted to get something done for Pennsylvania and Western Pennsylvania in particular, there was the go-to guy in the White House to make it happen was Rick Siger. And so he has a long history of public service, and we're really excited to hear his thoughts about the direction that he's leading DCED in, and for us to look forward to the work that he's doing for the Shapiro administration. So Rick.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. As you can hear, I actually lost my voice like yesterday. So I'm going to speak in a low tone. Can everybody hear me okay? I usually project a little better. I was so excited to be asked to join this group in particular because these are people that really get stuff done. I see a ton of familiar faces here, including Senator Coster, who's going to keep me honest on the budget numbers that I'm about to present to you. But really glad to be here. I'm going to make sure my slides are working. Okay, so I want to really do two things. The first thing is pretty quick but important. I want to share a couple of highlights of what we've been up to at DCED. And then secondly, and much more importantly, I want to share with you some of our thinking about the go-forward plan, Pennsylvania's strategy for economic development, and then ideally get into questions. Dr. Bullock, how are you? And hear from you your kind of feedback and steer as we move this ahead. So thanks again for having me. So let's get into it. Here's kind of what we've been up to. Trying to do the clicks. Starting this job, people often ask me, like, what was it like kind of getting this job? And it's basically like kind of grabbing onto a rocket ship like in mid-flight. In just 10 months, we've stood up a $120 million whole home repair program. We have pushed out the application process for $200 million of broadband funding with another $1.2 billion on the way. We've exited a number of communities. I think we're up to 7 now during the Shapiro administration from the state's Distressed Municipality Program, Act 47. And frankly, we've closed a bunch of deals. And in particular, I'd call your attention to one we announced this week, Astrobotic, right across the river, almost tripling in size in the north side, as they continue to grow and potentially become the first company to make it to the moon since the Apollo program. In addition to kind of DCED's accomplishments, I want to highlight a couple of things that the governor's really been pushing in the economic development context. One is the creation of this new Office of Transformation and Opportunity led by my colleague, Ben Kirshner. This is really about inculcating like a speed of business attitude and mentality across the Pennsylvania government. And I want to give you just one example of what they've been working on. You may have heard the governor talk about a review of permits, licenses, and certifications. The Commonwealth has about 2,400 of these things, from like a barber license to a driver's license to like a very complex environmental permit you might need for a manufacturing facility. We've cataloged every single one across every executive agency. By the way, my agency only has 2. This is really easy for me. And we've set kind of time-specific requirements across those licenses and permits. So customers, whether it's businesses or companies looking to locate here, or a barber looking to get a license to become, to start a small business, you have kind of certainty and predictability. And I'll give you one just quick example. And I keep listening to my voice crack. I sound kind of silly, but just stick with me here. I'll give you one quick example. When we started in this role, and when Governor Shapiro started in his role, it took like 8 weeks, give or take, to get a typical corporate filing done at the Department of State. So like if you wanted an LLC to start a company, it would take like 8 weeks to get it from Pennsylvania. It now takes 2 days, right? So just the mere kind of shining of light on the issue, putting some focused attention on it, we think has made a lot of significant progress. There's my click. Okay. Then real quick, I'm going to go to budget. Again, Senator Costa, keep me honest here. DCED has had a really exciting year because the governor, with the support of the legislature, secured a number of really important investments, for businesses, for communities, for workers in particular. And I'll just highlight a couple of these. Investments for businesses. We secured for the first time ever permanent funding for the historically disadvantaged business assistance program. And importantly, $10 million, which we've deployed to a new site development program we call PA Sites. SITES stands for something, but I can't really remember what it is at the moment. We actually just closed our site development program. We had like a hunch, if we pilot this program, put $10 million out there, we're going to get a massive amount of interest. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the numbers publicly, but let's just say we had well over 100 applications for many hundreds of millions of dollars across the state for just $10 million, right? So we think there's a lot of opportunity. I'll talk a little bit about that in the future. For workers, I'll just highlight one particular thing which I think is really important. We increased our support for apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships. This kind of experiential education model has been really important to the governor and really important to us. And then finally, on the community side, and this may be especially relevant to this group, these are not huge numbers, like in the context of the, billions and billions of dollars that the state spends each year. But the Municipal Assistance Program, Strategic Management Planning Program are 2 really proactive tools we have to help communities plan financially for the future, whether they're looking at, consolidating municipal services or whether we're trying to help them, remain financially viable. These kinds of proactive investments, I think, are really important as well. Okay, I'm going to take a quick drink. Okay, commercial over. Let's talk about what we're doing going forward. Pennsylvania has a lot going for it, right? This is actually an amazing place to do business. In fact, if you rank us against international economies, Pennsylvania is the 19th largest economy in the world, right? And as you can see here, and as folks in Pittsburgh, especially in this area, know, we have extraordinary R&D assets. We have extraordinary leadership in key sectors that are driving the global economy, whether it's like robotics and AI or life sciences. And we are where we are, if you will. Our strategic location is incredible. I think the stat is we're within an 8-hour drive of 40% of the US population. But we also have real challenges. And as, let me take one step back. And again, I apologize, like the sick and cold thing. It's been almost 20 years since Pennsylvania said, what's our plan for economic development? almost 20 years since we ran a public process where we talked to folks and said, where should we be going? Where should we be making investments? What policies should we be pursuing at the state level? And that's not to say that the state hasn't done really productive things in economic development over that time. They certainly have. But I think Governor Shapiro is bringing a renewed focus to this. And to do that, we need a plan. And in the context of the plan, we need to identify, of course, our opportunities and our challenges. So the spirit in which I show you these challenges, which are many, is in really being clear-eyed about the look that we need to take to compete and to win as a state. I will tell you the most common question I got when I took this job is some version of, why didn't Pennsylvania get Intel, right? And the answer to that question is very complicated, but the core answer is we have to compete better. And some of the challenges that you see here, some of which are macroeconomic, like historic slowdowns, or slowdowns in historic sectors of strength, are macro related. And some of them are things where we have really direct control. Like, it's not as easy to do business here as it should be. We talked a little bit about the Office of Transformation in that context. We don't have the level of insufficiency of industrial sites ready for clients that we need. We talked a little bit about that a second ago as well. So what I want to share with you with these opportunities and challenges as a framework is how we're thinking about moving a process forward to build a plan and then execute on that plan. And by the way, the plan is still in development. So this is like a very good timing. I'm not presenting to you like, here's the plan. I'm presenting to you, here's how we're thinking about this. And would love to kind of get your feedback and go into the Q&A there. So given those strengths and weaknesses, given dozens and dozens of meetings across the state, given a really deep look at the data, we actually thought there's a pretty simple way to organize what we need to do. We need to ensure we have a government that works at the speed of business, has the right tools to compete. We need to make sure that every region of Pennsylvania can succeed in a plan, and every person that lives in Pennsylvania can succeed in that plan. We've got to double down in innovation and industry strengths that we have that really builds on a foundation that I think differentiates Pennsylvania from a lot of our competitors. And we've got to double down on our people and our workforce. So let me just share a couple of elements of each of these, and then I want to kind of get your feedback. Did I miss one? I'm missing a slide in here for some reason. That's my fault. But let's talk about government at the speed of business for a second. DCD has an incredible array of tools. We have something like 196 tools, or 186 tools in our toolkit. But some of them have gotten a little long in the tooth, I would say. Some of them are undercapitalized. Some of them are created for very particular circumstances that don't exist anymore. We're actually doing an audit of every single one of those tools, and we're going to make recommendations, for what to fund and how to fund them to compete kind of in this economy. One such example, and I'll just use this as an example, is tools around industrial site development. We have very few, partially because of our topography, partially because of, we're an old place. Pennsylvania has very few industrial sites at the scale required to compete for the kinds of deals that you may be reading about in the paper today, where an auto company is building an electric vehicle battery factory, or a chip company is building a fab. We have people with a lot of expertise, but we literally don't have places to put companies like this in Pennsylvania. This is something we believe we can change, and as we look at kind of the government's role, that's one thing we're very focused on. Okay. Secondly, when we talk about supporting Pennsylvania's regions and our people, I'll just be really blunt about it. Like, if we put together a strategy that doesn't, where every county and every region of Pennsylvania doesn't see themselves in it, like, that's a failure. This has to be a strategy that works for everyone. And I should point out that that's actually a really hard thing to accomplish because Pennsylvania is extremely diverse. And so I'll test drive kind of one idea on you here that I particularly like. I like the idea of like a regional challenge grant model where we can both help provide technical assistance for regions to, build out ideas for how to grow their economies and then fund them at scale. Something modeled after, for example, the Economic Development Administration's Build Back Better model, or New York State, which runs a similar kind of program, where you could imagine places like the Pennsylvania Wilds or the Powdered Middle Cluster in northern Pennsylvania, which may not actually be like a statewide play that we would fund in a statewide way. going after real dollars at scale, to help grow what those folks, view in a bottom-up way as a key part of their future. I mentioned innovation. There's some stats on this slide, but again, I think this room is full of people that know in a very core way that one of Pennsylvania's significant strengths is our research ecosystem. We also know that for Chancellor Nordenberg, you could probably tell me 25 to 30 years plus. There's report after report that comes out and says Pennsylvania has $5 billion a year in R&D, and yet, actually, if you look at the data, I'm going to tell you a stat that sort of floored me. Per capita, we're 48th of 50 states in startup rate. Given that kind of mismatch of research excellence and startup activity, we think actually there's some low-hanging fruit where we can really help to catalyze this ecosystem. And by the way, of course, there's also incredible examples of companies all over the state that are startups that are like examples of what can happen here. I mentioned Astrobotic before. There are dozens and dozens in Pittsburgh and across the state. And then finally, talent. I would say to you that 99% of the time when I talk to a business leader and say, like, what's your top concern? What's your top challenge? It's not, incentives, although, cash is important. It's always people. Where do I have a site to put a facility, and can I get the people, to staff that facility? So any economic development strategy is going to have to work really hard to develop, retain, and attract talent. And this is actually a good opportunity for me to make a point that I should have made earlier, which is, well, I'm the secretary of DCD, which is a great honor of mine. This is really like a team sport, right? DCD has about 350 people. It's a pretty small place, relative to the challenges before us. And in particular for things like workforce, my colleagues, not just at the state level, but colleagues all across Pennsylvania, folks like you, economic developers everywhere, we want to help convene those folks around this strategy. And workforce is a very particular and important way we believe we can do that. And then finally, I just want to make a key point here, which is that we can't do everything, right? We only have so many resources, we only have so many people, and we have to differentiate ourselves in like a highly, highly competitive landscape where many states surrounding us, the states we directly compete with, have been investing at an extremely high level in economic development for a period of time when we have not. And so across these domains, whether it's in how we do deals or whether it's the kind of innovation areas that we focus on, we've done a lot of research, and we believe that there are 5 sectors where Pennsylvania has really distinct opportunity to lead the world. Like, or as someone said to me, where can we kind of be like top 5? There are 2 on this page that are very fast growing: life sciences and technology and robotics. Like the CAGR for those sectors, like the compound annual growth rate is like off the charts. And so we're sort of catching sectors that are growing very quickly. In the case of manufacturing, ag, and energy, projected growth rates are lower, but those are places where we have like really, really specific and core differentiation. And in the case of manufacturing in particular, which is also like highly related to these other fast growing sectors, like robotics needs to manufacture, life science needs to manufacture, for example. So again, we're not done with the plan. I'm not presenting you our final view, but I think at this stage of the game, having looked at the data, understanding, both the macro economy and what's happening in Pennsylvania, and the need to be really regionally diverse and choose sectors that we think have a chance to succeed and win across Pennsylvania. This is our current thinking. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm running out of gas, I need to go to a question here on The Voice. And again, I'm really sorry. Usually I'm like the loudmouth guy. How we actually do this process matters a lot. At least it matters a lot to me. And I think, excuse me. I think of this kind of like a 3-legged stool. The first leg of the stool is sort of what I said before. It's a team sport. We're a small agency, and economic development engages anything from education to transportation to environmental protection to all the many local economic developers and local officials across Pennsylvania. And we've got to be really strong partners. We can help set an agenda. We can do the work, but we've got to have everybody on board to help us move this forward. Number 2 is, I put a lot of miles on the car talking to folks all across Pennsylvania about this plan. both groups like yourselves of experts or, people from local government or people from the robotics industry, the life science industry. We also convene kind of just broad folks across Pennsylvania in various places to understand and listen to them. Like, what do you want to see in a plan? Like, what would resonate with you, to make sure we're sort of grounding our thinking in real life, like what's happening on the ground. And then finally, we've done a ton of research, and we're making sure that we ground this plan in a really deep understanding, not just of what's happening in Pennsylvania today, but what we believe will happen.
Thank you for visiting the History Center and Sports Museum. We will be closing in 30 minutes at 5 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. And we think we have a really strong understanding of where we are. Data is not everything, but I think understanding what we want to measure, where we want to go, what our strengths and weaknesses are is really important. So with that, I'm going to take a pause and welcome questions and feedback. Our goal is, just by way of kind of next steps, I've committed to the governor that we will have something, on his desk by the end of this year, and our team is working extremely hard to do this. And I don't know exactly when we'll kind of roll something out publicly, but I do think we're still very much at a point where would welcome steering or feedback or things maybe you wish you'd heard, things that I said that you think are dumb. Don't be shy. Would love to hear the feedback, and would love to engage in a conversation to the extent my voice will survive for the next 25 minutes. Thanks a lot.
So I'll just get the question started. One of the things you talked about was the importance of the strategies that you develop reflecting the needs of every area of the state. Yeah. And you also talked about the fact that Pennsylvania is a very diverse state. We look at some of the economic challenges in communities where there's economic distress, and there are some similarities in the challenges, say for communities in rural areas and communities in urban areas, but there are also some differences there. So as you're thinking about strategies that help lift up those communities in particular, what are some of the strategies that work specifically in those particular contexts, but also what are lessons learned and strategies that work in both, and you can really accelerate deploying them?
Yeah, this is a really important question. It may be like the hardest part of my job. Like, how do you develop a plan that is really dynamic and useful and helps people move their economies forward in Pike County and, West Philadelphia at the same time? I think there's kind of like two ways I think about this. One is there's a set of tools and approaches we can take that are just broadly beneficial to businesses and communities anywhere. And I actually think that it's kind of boring. But this idea of government at the speed of business, can we just work faster? Can we be a more reliable partner to businesses? I'm not talking about changing the rules or reducing the requirements around environmental permit. But when you apply, can we tell you, based on your project, exactly what you need to do and the timeline against which we are going to execute as your partner to get it done? That is going to have, I think, broad benefit anywhere for any small business, large business looking to start. And I think the better we can be at just our kind of core, I don't want to say boring because I actually find it very interesting, but the kind of core government service part, I think that's an example of the kind of thing that's going to be broadly supportive across any part of Pennsylvania. But there's also a lot of differentiation in our economy. And I think while it's important for the state to stake a claim in certain areas where we think we can really win, it's also important for us to respect that regional diversification. And it's one reason I like models like the one I talked about briefly, and I'm happy to get into more detail if it's of interest, like this kind of regional competition model, where at scale, this isn't a couple $100K, but over 3 years, maybe 10, 15, $20 million, we would say to a relatively small regional geography, let us help you develop a set of ideas based on your specific interests and your specific capabilities, assets, people. And we want to fund that as a partner for you. And And of course, the application that you would get from West Philly would be really different from Pike County. And that's okay, right? Because we could sort of assess those applications in that context. And so I think those kinds of tailored programs that are where you sort of meet people where they are helpful. Like Governor Shapiro said to me very early on in this job, like in the context of a particular place, which it doesn't matter. Like if they have a plan, I want to invest, right? And a lot of places don't have a plan. So if we can help really build capacity in places, help places see, where they're trying to get, whether it's like helping them fund an engineering study for a stormwater upgrade, or helping them think about how to take a powdered metals industry in north central Pennsylvania and add technology so they can serve this burgeoning electric vehicle marketplace. Those are places where we can help in like a more bottom-up way, and help drive progress in the way that folks want to see it. So those are a couple of ideas, but it's a big challenge, and one that I know we'll be constantly addressing really going forward. Should I call, or do you want to call? Let's just go this way. Yes, sir.
Secretary, thanks for coming to Pittsburgh. It's always good to have you here. Thank you. A question in terms of the plan as it's being built, and a point to kind of remind ourselves on. When you showed the slide on the 5 key industries that are about ready to take off, or specifically life science and robotics about to take off, I think an important point for us all to keep in mind is nothing happens quickly. This has been 30, 40 years where we're now at the point where those industries are about to take off or are taking off. So my question is, the plan that you're developing, knowing that you only have 4 to 8 years to implement your parts of it, is it going to be a plan that really has us look over a period of significant years to do?
Yeah, great point. Look, I worked at Carnegie Mellon, as many folks know, for 7, 8 years, and we used to joke it's like an overnight success story that started in 1986 or something, right? Like the robotics industry in Pittsburgh is like the result of just tenacious hard work by a series of people over decades. But what I do think these sectors show is like, so the short answer to your question is, it's a 10-year plan. We were very thoughtful, I think. We thought a lot about, let's say, why 10 years? And there's 2 important reasons, I think. One is, I wanted to be really clear that, while of course this is Governor Shapiro's plan, and in some sense, anything the government does in an administration is like political, quote unquote. Like, we're really trying to create a plan that we think is not just bipartisan, but kind of nonpartisan. Like, here's where we think the economy's going. And 10 years, of course, is well beyond the scope of any individual governor. The second reason is, I think if you go beyond 10 years, you kind of lose the ability to be real. Think about our economy 10 years ago and 10 years before that. I just feel like that may be like a timeline a little too far. Even 10 feels a little long to me, just given the speed with which these huge factors are shifting our economy, whether it's like, the prevalence of, data analytics and artificial intelligence, or onshoring, or COVID. I mean, there's just all these massive factors. It just makes it hard, I think, to be real about what we could do over that course of period of time. So that's a little bit how I think about it. And I think about, with respect to robotics and life sciences, in some sense, our analysis bakes those trajectories into the cake. Where, like, because of those decades of incredibly hard work and persistence, we, especially in this region, but actually also in Philadelphia, interestingly, have a set of talent and a set of companies that are really well prepared to sort of take advantage of the trajectory of this industry. And the same is true of life sciences. Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are at different stages, let's say, on the commercial continuum. But, I got to say, for example, the Philly life science industry and cell and gene therapy, it's pretty exciting. I mean, there's a lot of velocity, a lot of really interesting companies coming out of those universities. And I think, the state is not the answer to every question or the solution to every problem. But if we can help get behind some of these areas where we think not only is there enormous job creation potential at the kind of, PhD level, or these kind of highly innovative startup jobs, where there are downstream manufacturing opportunities, other opportunities in life sciences, for example, in clinical settings, we think those kinds of bets can really pay off. And by the way, we've seen that in other states, right? Massachusetts and Texas come to mind, where those states have made, structured and smart bets in life science, to use an example, they've seen enormous payoff. So thanks for the question. Georgia.
I'm sorry. I'm Georgia Petropoulos. I work in Oakland. So, Obid, we're all just as baffled. How are we 48th, right, in the country with this amazing research? I mean, Philadelphia, but goodness, right here in Pennsylvania. So, can we get a sneak peek? Are there any areas or towns or states that you're looking at that we also can be looking at, sort of that are comparable, that we can be seeing? I mean, we've taken folks to Midtown Atlanta, we've gone to Houston, Texas, Philadelphia, Center City, and some are comparable, some really aren't to Pittsburgh, to southwestern Pennsylvania. Yep. Just want to know if there were any others that you can think of.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think depending on what you're benchmarking to, there's different answers. So like in terms of what I would call like the core economic development deal capability, like market to a company, bring them here, like run them through a deal flow process, get them to sort of locate, hire people. There's a bunch of states around us, like Ohio and New York and Virginia, North Carolina, a little further afield, Tennessee, that do this really well. And I think there's Georgia, there's a lot that we can learn from them. And of course we have similarities and differences with all those states, right? Like there's a lot about Pennsylvania that's different than Georgia, but some of their core capabilities and what they've developed, I think, are really strong. In the kind of innovation domain, I really do think we have a pretty unique set of research assets, which are spread, by the way, across the whole state, right? It's not just Pittsburgh and Philly. In the context of specific clusters like life sciences, I mentioned Massachusetts. I think many people would probably tell you that's best in class. And like if you went to Kendall Square 25 years ago, like it didn't look like it does today, where if you're a life science company and you're not there, like you're not there. I think that the idea of precedence in cities and states is like important but not determinative. Like we don't want to learn from those models, but we want to have like a real Pennsylvania plan. Like what happens in Ohio, some of it may work here, some of it may not. But I think that kind of customization, benchmarking for data collection is really important, but we want to build our own strategy that we think is going to work here. So I'm going to keep going this way and I'll come back that way. There were a couple hands on that side. I think, thanks. Again, sorry about the voice. This is just like listening to myself makes me sick.
Rick, thank you so much. I'm curious if you can speak to how DCED in the state thinks about aligning the budget to the scale of the opportunities that you described.
Yeah.
So, for example, you talked about the apprenticeship program. I'm curious how many individuals that program can support and how many individuals could benefit from an opportunity like that, and how many individuals could that field absorb,
right?
Especially if that's a top concern for bringing industry here. And then if we can't meet the scale that's needed with the budget, like then what? Is it pilots like you described, or what's the thought process there?
Yeah. Would you mind also just introducing yourself? I'm sorry.
Sure, I'm Josie.
Great. The last couple of people that talked, I just knew them, so yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm Josie Inamorado from the Heinz Endowment.
Oh, fantastic. Nice to meet you, Josie. So scale is really important, but so are results, I guess I would think about this. And I'll just use a couple of examples. So I think, let's take site development, because I have those numbers at the top of my head. We, over time, have spent dollars at scale on site development, but our average spend over the last 5 to 10 years is about $10 million a year, $10 to $15 million a year across the whole state. If you look at, as an example, Ohio, last year in one budget year, Ohio passed a brownfield development program that was like $597 million. And their average spend on an annual basis is in like the hundreds of millions range. And, I like Pennsylvania better than Ohio. There's lots of things I like about us better than Ohio. But like if you look at the results that they've started to see in terms of industrial development and job creation, they're really impressive, really impressive. I think that looking at that benchmarking, building smart pilots like the one we just launched this year for a very small amount of money, relatively speaking, but where we can sort of like pulse the community to understand what opportunities are out there. Learn a lot about program design in like a lower stakes environment, and then make some small awards and try to build support for what we believe is a need for a much larger number.
Thank you for visiting the History Center and Sports Museum. We will be closing in 15 minutes at 5 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's like a path that I personally like. It helps us learn fast and iterate, but it also helps us build the case. But I think there's no question that scale is important, especially in a state this big, and in the kind of core tools that we need, like deal closing funds and site development funds, and frankly, just the size and sort of dynamism of our existing team. We are behind in scale, and that's one of the things that's important. Let me just say one other thing about this. When we first started looking at this plan, I was so excited to look at these kind of like grand challenges and moonshots and innovation in Pennsylvania is all this great stuff. And like we want to do all that stuff, but it actually turns out that the foundation upon which we can build all that sort of visionary opportunity needs a lot of work. So I think like step one is shore up the foundation. Some of that is putting a plan in place, getting people behind it and excited, but some of it is really kind of rebuilding our toolkit and our kind of core assets so we can go out and market those assets and get a bunch of jobs created here in Pennsylvania. It's a great question. Maybe one more on that side. Uh-oh, did the mic runner just, oh, yeah.
Thanks, Rick. Melissa Wade with Aurora. When I moved here from DC 4 years ago, we were just about 100 employees, right? And now we're north sides of 800 employees, a couple blocks over, which is, I think, such an awesome part of the story. And I think somebody else was from a different part of town, but one of the great things about taking this job for me was that I was much closer to my family in Ohio. But when I look at what it takes, and we have offices across the country to attract folks to either stay here, which I think is a huge part of why our founders are so invested in Pittsburgh. And again, to go back to kind of the 48th versus the amount of R&D work. And it's a national issue, right? That tranche from like R&D, getting it through the commercialization. What does that look like? And you mentioned, government moving at the speed of business. Is the speed of business, meeting businesses where they are, meeting these young entrepreneurs, meeting folks who, have been at some of these companies or have been at the big universities here and seen what you can do in Pittsburgh, is meeting them at the this is what it takes. Here's government as a convener. Here are the people and here are the places where you can be to find, an RIDC, to find those places where if you have an idea, if you have the vision, here's what it would take to build that here in Pittsburgh. Is that part of kind of what you're talking about? And again, it's important, the big deals, right? Like the big money push, but having people kind of see that vision when it's less, we're going to cut this check, but we can show you what this actually looks like here in Pittsburgh. Is that part of what you're thinking about?
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. First of all, amazing company, Aurora, like incredible success story, and one, we love to brag about. So thanks for giving us like a point to brag about. It's both really important that we're able to close big deals, like giant company X wants to build a manufacturing plant, and we need to have the sites and the incentives to get that done. But it's equally, or actually maybe more important, that we focus on these kind of enabling elements of our economy. And I think, I sort of went through the presentation fast, but as we talk about this kind of innovation ecosystem, like supporting founders and startups and helping keep young people here and really trying to build that community, across Pennsylvania is really important. And I think you would agree with this. I'm curious if you would, but like I remember, I grew up here and then I left for a while, like 20 years, and came back. And there was like a point in the early 2010s or mid 2010s when I feel like Pittsburgh kind of like clicked over from a place where like if you went to go work at Google and it didn't work out, you were kind of screwed, to a place where there was like an ecosystem of a bunch of companies, so that, if you went to take a job at Aurora and it didn't work out, like you could just kind of go work somewhere else, right? This is like why Silicon Valley works. Like the average tenure of an engineer at a software company in Silicon Valley is like 10 months or something ridiculous like that. Like the turnover is just constant. And that kind of ecosystem building is really, really important. And again, in the spirit of the state is not the answer to every question, the solution to every problem. Like where can the state play? One place we can really play is convening. And I think helping regions kind of build plans for what they want to do. Like I love the Build Back Better stuff here. Of course, I have a personal interest in that, having worked on it. But like helping states kind of realize their plans around the strengths that they have as a place the state can convene, but also fund, as a partner. And then I think beyond that, it's also important for the state to have the infrastructure so that like the next time Aurora wants to grow and like add 1,000 employees here, like we can help you do that, right? We can have a site ready for you. We can do an incentive that makes it so you do it here and not in Texas or wherever else you're operating. I think all those things are important. So great question. I'm going to make you do this long walk.
I'm so excited I get to ask you a question. I would love to hear how Alice layers into your planning. Are you thinking about jobs for Alice or just jobs at all? Are you distinguishing between jobs that pay enough to afford to live in a place, or is it just a job's a job and we need as many jobs as we can get?
Yeah, great question. We should connect after. I'd love to learn more about Alice specifically, but like on the point of like job quality, right? I think that's kind of what you're asking. Like, I'm going to get some of the numbers specifically wrong, but broadly speaking, you probably know this better than me. Like if you look at the areas where Pennsylvania's economy has really grown dramatically in the last 10 years, both geographically, because parts of the state are growing really fast actually, like the Lehigh Valley, for example. The areas, the industries where the growth is highest is healthcare and distribution and logistics, right? Two sectors which historically have, lower wages than, for example, manufacturing or, other domains. And so, as I said earlier, we are where we are. Like our location is really strategic for lots of companies to manufacture and to distribute. But we have a policy, for example, that we actually don't incentivize distribution and logistics companies in the eastern part of the state. Partially because we don't have to, they build it anyway. And partially because, in a lot of the areas where they're building, those wages don't sort of like meet a threshold that we think is reasonable to, merit state participation. Conversely, if you wanted to build a distribution center and pay someone, $25 an hour in, Warren County, like let's have a conversation about that. So I think it's highly geographically, relevant, but it is true that, I'm for jobs, all jobs, but like in the narrow question of where can the state invest and play, like it's very important to us. And part of the reason we're focusing on these industries and taking the approaches we do, that the jobs we are helping to create and incentivize are high quality jobs. And we've had a lot of conversations about what that means, and again, really high geographic variability. But generally speaking, very much, as we look at the core metrics that we're considering for measuring our success, there's like overall job creation metric, but there's also like a number of metrics on the quality of those jobs, measured by kind of like median wage variation and things like that. So, great question. Oh, what? Yeah, please, ma'am, and then, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Cindy Bond. I'm a municipal manager, and thanks for being here. And
Thanks
to DCED for all the grants over the years.
Sure.
We know Pennsylvania, 67 counties, we've got in Allegheny County, 130 municipalities. The state has 500 school districts. In your opinion, what does all that fragmentation, how does that impact economic development in Pennsylvania? Or doesn't it?
Oh, that's an easy one. Just kidding. So there's 2,560 municipalities, actually. 130 of them are here in Allegheny County. Look, I think it presents a unique set of challenges in some contexts, like land use decisions and zoning decisions, devolve to the municipal level. And therefore, there's challenges associated sometimes with, aligning the interests of the state and the county and a local municipality to get kind of big things done. But I do think that, I guess I would say that this is our system, so we need to build, strategies and interventions that sort of take it into account and, move ourselves forward in the way that we think is smartest. And again, not to dwell on this kind of regional idea again, but I do think it's actually pretty hard to get one municipality on the same page, much less all the municipalities in the county, much less multiple counties. But I think the results that you see when you sort of drive that alignment and work hard at it, and maybe dollars from the state can be like a incentive to try to drive that kind of alignment, it can be really helpful. And I also think, as we think about programs like site development, we're running like essentially a competitive grant process, so that by definition, when like a developer or municipality applies for dollars for site development, they're sort of like agreeing that this is the kind of site we want and the kind of land use that, final end use that we would want. The other thing I would say is, one really big takeaway from my first 10 months in the job is like local leadership in our system, in any system, but in particular in our municipal system, matters it just matters so much, right? Like the political leadership, but in particular, I'm talking about like the professional leadership of municipalities, like township managers, economic development directors. And there's just massive variability in experience level and skill level among those folks. I'm not talking about like Philadelphia, but there are like a lot of townships and places in Pennsylvania with like a couple hundred people. And one thing I'm really interested in is having the state play a much more active role in professional development, executive education, like sort of peer-to-peer network building among that group of folks. Because again, I got 350 people. Like the people that are really the boots on the ground doing this work are all the folks in these localities. So I think empowering those folks to kind of have the skills and a voice in the process is really important. Doing it across 2,560 municipalities is pretty hard, but I don't think that Senator Costa could check me on this. I don't think we're changing that system anytime soon. So I think we just got to build the right processes and put the right stuff in place, to work it. So thanks. This is a really very hard and important question. Could someone ask me an easier question? Let's go one here and then right back to you.
Mary Esther Ventura, in the city of Pittsburgh.
Gotcha.
In the Amazon proposal, obviously fragmentation made the proposal very difficult to develop. One area of particular interest to them was education. And yet we had to be sensitive to the fact that we're dealing with a company in which they were interfacing with other areas that had a county-run school district. So when they just asked for one simple question, what are the languages taught in your schools, in your county? I was putting some data together. I said, well, there's 43 school districts. And they didn't just want to have, it's Spanish or French, K to 4, 4 to 6. And I said, well, not everybody's organized the same. So I think what we learned from that, or perhaps we didn't learn from that, is that if a major company wants to relocate here, we should have some type of database that would have all those issues that they were delineated in their proposal. And what I would recommend is we can't do it by county, but we could do what I call naturally occurring design. And that is, maybe we do 13 templates because there's 13 county districts. Or we do it on legislative districts because obviously that would please, I think, our legislative delegation. So you have to think more broadly, but I don't know if we left that proposal, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been in the county in a few years. I don't think we learned from...
The Sports Museum are now closed.
Yeah.
Thank you for visiting the
Yeah.
Smithsonian's home in Pittsburgh.
Is there an opportunity for us to create templates that recognize the fragmentation and that we know because we're competing with those that are not fragmented. We were competing with Philadelphia, that's city county, and we're not. We're competing with school districts that they're county run, and we're not. Do you have any thought on that? And maybe somebody's already exploring it, but...
Yeah, I want to think about that a little more and follow up with you, but I think that what I've learned in this job, and it was certainly true of that Amazon process, which, as you know, I was also worked on behalf of this region. Companies at that size and scale, or even there's no company of that size and scale, but large companies are just incredibly sophisticated in their analysis of a place before they decide to locate there. Like before they even call me or call our team, they have done just an extremely deep dive on everything you're talking about and 10,000 other things, transportation, education, crime rate, site development. Like they are so detailed in their analysis, and they have like these rigorous kind of scoring rubrics against which they sort of rate various places. I don't actually know the answer to the question, do they find that kind of fragmentation sort of frustrating, or is it like a specific barrier as they think about a place like Western PA? But it's certainly something we could ask them. One thing we've done, and it's nice to be new, sometimes, is we've actually asked a lot of these folks, including some of the leading kind of real estate consultants and business consultants in the country, like, hey, will you come to Harrisburg and just kind of like fill us in on what you think? And they said, sure, right? And so we drilled them. We spent a day and a half with these guys and gals and said, like, what are we good at? What are we bad at? And that's sort of where I picked up on some of just the super deep dives that they're doing into these places. It's really, they almost know more about us than we know about us in some sense as they're advising their clients. But the specific question of fragmentation wasn't really raised as like a weakness. I think it makes it harder for the governments because you have to align at least 3 governments. Like everywhere in Pennsylvania is in at least 3 places, right? It's in a municipality and a county and the state, except Philadelphia, I guess. It's like only 2. But I don't know that it's like a specific differentiator for business. It's something worth looking into. Thanks. Sir. Also, I assume someone's looking at the clock here. I'm just going to keep going until I get the hook.
Thank you. I have just a comment. My name is Jem Spector. I'm the president of the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown. And I just wanted to, first of all, thank you and your team. I think your representative there is Morgan Boyd, who has helped the community in a project that we're working on, which is quite similar to what Maria Flynn talked about, which is the university is taking some of its programs, specifically engineering and advanced manufacturing and some robotics, and we're going to do a project in the downtown area in partnership with the local schools, and your team has been very helpful, and I wanted to thank you. And my question really is about what are your, based on your experience, and I think it's a very substantial. With regard to communities like Johnstown, what are the prospects for really turning things around, given that where we are, and just to reflect on, because as you know, there's a lot of optimism and there's a lot of energy, and we're all trying very hard, and obviously your team has been very helpful. But as you look at communities that are very similar to Johnstown around the country, what are the prospects for really turning it around?
Another easy one. Thanks. Look, I sort of start from the place that, like, every place matters, right? And Johnstown in particular, I think if you look at some recent momentum in downtown, a DOT grant, you guys thinking about, taking space in the city, like, those are all things that are adding toward what I think is a real plan. Remember when I said earlier, the governor said, like, if you have a plan, we want to invest. Like, he was actually talking about Johnstown, because we went there. I like dragged my whole team there like 6 months ago and said, like, what's your plan? And it turns out, the city had hired like a strong manager and a strong economic development director. And there's like a sense of optimism, not for sort of what was like a Johnstown of 60,000 people and, all that stuff, but for what sort of could be. And I think that our job is to sort of support those plans and try to be smart about what's ambitious but realistic. And I think, rebuilding American manufacturing in the heart of Pennsylvania, focused on, serving some of these innovative industries we've been talking about, upskilling our workers to support that manufacturing, I think that's possible in places like Johnstown. And we've seen signs of real optimism there, and like, that's our job, is to make it possible. But it's hard. It's really hard. And the population dynamics and the industrial and sort of economics of these places, this very well, are many decades in the making, and it's not like some overnight solution. But I think, we've got to be focused on helping give these places a real shot to succeed. And I think in the particular case of Johnstown, I've actually been really excited about the prospects. I think it's actually quite an exciting time there. So thanks. One more. Or maybe that was it. All right, well, thanks, folks. Yeah.
Is this what I'm supposed to use? Well, under any set of circumstances, we should be thanking Secretary Siger and hope that maybe he gets some kind of special commendation from the Commonwealth for spending time and sharing knowledge with us when he's obviously not feeling 100%. So thank you again, Rick. And I do want to thank not only the secretary, but the outstanding keynote speakers that we had this afternoon. Maria Flynn, who has left, Stephanie Hoops, who is still here, as well as the three community leader facilitators, Stephanie Pashman, Bobby Watt-Gear, and Richard Taylor. And as we come to the end of this afternoon, I do also want to thank, in particular, Samantha Balbier and Brianna Mihawk. We had a lot of planning sessions that went into this program. And I basically sat there and listened to their good ideas and then watched them go out into the world and make things happen. And so we really are grateful to you. I found the afternoon to be a terrific one. First, in terms of all that I learned, and I think that I was not alone in that, because I saw a lot of other people taking notes, or those who are more modern than I am taking photographs of the slides, which I hope I can get in some other way. There also was a tone that was almost inspiring to the afternoon in some ways, as opportunities were identified, some of them really tied to global developments, some of them tied to the unusual federal spending patterns that are going to create opportunities here and in other places if we're ready for them. It was good to hear national figures talking both about our regional strengths and about the innovative ways in which our state government currently was approaching some of the challenges and opportunities that we face. I mean, it was great to have Secretary Siger here laying out the directions in which they're traveling, but it was also very nice to hear earlier in the afternoon, well, your administration is doing this and your administration is doing that, and they're setting a pace in some of these important areas. But I would say that in addition to being inspiring, this was an afternoon that instilled in me or enhanced in me a real sense of urgency. You know, when you hear Stephanie talk about groups of people who feel as if they are invisible and forgotten and left behind, how long can we leave people feeling like that? Just in terms of basic fairness and what we owe to each other. And another message that came from her presentation is that, you know, a lot of these people are clustered together. So even in regions that are doing well, you can find pockets, neighborhoods and communities that really need help. You know, they're not going to be able to do it all by themselves. So there are things that we need to do, and looking at it more broadly in terms of the social fabric and what we need to have in order to keep the country strong and moving forward together. There's nothing that is more destructive than the feeling that there is no hope, that there isn't any hope for you, or worse yet, that there isn't much hope for your kids. And so as we think about some of the challenges and the opportunities that are presented, we clearly have work to do to make certain that we capitalize on some of these opportunities in ways that will be good for individuals and good for communities, and maybe will propel us all forward in a good direction. As Samantha indicated earlier, we will be pulling together discussion groups that relate to some of these opportunities as we move into the new year. And we'll welcome your participation in that stage of the process as well. And we also welcome your ideas, as I think we always have, as you think about paths forward for the region and the people who make up the region in terms of the role that we can play in partnership with many of the other fine organizations that are represented here today through your presence. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your clear interest and commitment to being a part of building a better future here in our home region. As you all know, I think the annual Mo Coleman Awards Dinner will start downstairs in a few minutes. Those of you who are staying for the dinner, I think it should be a good evening. Those of you who can't, if you want to stay for a bit of the reception, which is going to start at 5:30, your company would be very welcome. We have two outstanding leaders, Christine McClure and Jim Roddy, that we're planning to honor tonight. And again, it should be a very happy evening, and we look forward to sharing that with you too. Thanks. And since they were not throwing other people out until 5 o'clock, I'm not sure whether the reception will be ready. It is ready now? Oh, so down on the first floor, there will be drinks and good company for those of you who are positioned to participate. Thanks again.